And then let's go over to the presentation. So, as I said, welcome. Applied Cloud Computing and Big Data. This is a course offered by BTH, Blekinge Institute of Technology, and together with Prompt, which is an initiative together with a couple of other universities in Sweden. A few words to begin with about big data. You probably know already with all the hype that's been around big data that big data it's not just big, it's huge actually. We're talking petabytes of data and large amounts to collect, large amounts to sort, store and analyze. In its very nature, it's unstructured. If we had the ability to keep collecting just the data we wanted, then we would have means available to analyze it much easier. The thing is, we collect as much as we can, and then we try to find out what we can do with it. Which means that it is a treasure trove for discovering new or hidden values. We can analyze the data we have in new, interesting ways and find new conclusions or draw new conclusions out of it. But because it's so huge, we have new challenges when it comes to storing it, organizing, and managing the data. So that's one part of the course, to look a bit further into big data. And the other one is cloud computing. So cloud computing, if all the promises hold true, it's distributed storage and it's parallel computing and it's the ability to only set up the resources we need when we need them. And we can schedule that so we can have only the service we need when we need them and at no other time. We only pay for what we use. And there's a lot of promise that we can also keep track of what we have running and how much resources we are consuming at any given point in time. So all in all, this seems like all you really need in order to deal with big data, right? We can parallelize, we can add new resources as we get more data, and we can add more resources in order to analyze, and we can keep track of what we have running. And we only pay for as much data or for as much processing power to process the data we have. So it seems like a match made in heaven, and which is why we combine them into one course. So what we'll be doing in this course is that we will look into the basics of big data analytics. What are the first steps when we come into wanting to do some sort of analysis of big data? What are the first obstacles we run into and how do we work around them? Same thing with cloud computing. We won't be looking at how to set up a cloud computing server. We have other courses for that, but we will be looking into how to use cloud computing resources. So if I want to run my server on the cloud, rather than how do I set up to be a cloud provider. And if that's those terms are unfamiliar to you now, the difference between a cloud provider and a cloud consumer, if you will, then you'll learn more about that during the course. So when should we use cloud services and how should we use them? That's part of the course that to get an understanding of that. When is a cloud resource the best way to go and when isn't it? We'll be working a lot with provisioning and deployment, so practical experience in how to set up a cloud environment and how to test it locally first, and then once you're certain that you have everything in place, then you can deploy it to a cloud provider. And the same thing with solving a big data analytics problem. You'll get some practical experience in solving a particular problem. And in the end, you'll be using Hadoop, which is one common analysis framework, following the MapReduce paradigm. Prompt, a few words about that. As I mentioned, it's a collaboration between a number of different universities in Sweden. The idea is that there's a lot of people, or the original idea at least was that there's a lot of people out in the industry, the software engineering industry, who don't really have an academic background within software engineering, but they suddenly find themselves that over the past years or so, they've been doing mostly software engineering work. So we started this as an initiative to provide courses for people with diverse backgrounds to get the formal academic credits for software engineering skills that they need or might already have in some sense. It's a distance education initiative, so we're exploring different ways of teaching without requiring any campus presence. Well, you reap more or less the benefits of that. There are plenty of other courses here in the Prompt Initiative, so if you haven't looked into it already, then I recommend that you do look into it. So there's courses on software testing, there's courses on user experience, there are courses on, I think, some on global software engineering, and so on and so forth. So really the idea is that you should be able to pick and choose and put together your entire master's education with courses from Prompt. Me, myself, work at BTH, have done for since before the turn of the last century, doing research in software architectures and requirements engineering mostly. I moved back and forth between those two. Teach, well, cloud computing, of course, object-oriented design, and, well, software architectures, obviously, and wherever else they want me to teach, I'm sort of a jack of all trades there. Cloud computing, to me, is an interesting approach to working with software architectures, really. So software architecture needs to be deployed in some way or other onto a hardware platform. And that's where a cloud computing platform comes in, where you can set up a flexible hardware platform with as many servers or as many CPUs that you need in order to deploy a software architecture. So every course has a course syllabus. This is cut straight from it. You can find the entire course syllabus on the course homepage on Canvas. I'll come to Canvas later. What this basically boils down to is that there are 3 themes into this course. The first theme is cloud provisioning and deployment, basically setting up virtual servers or virtual machines on your locally, and how to do that in a programmable way, a repeatable way, and then deploy them to cloud servers later on, cloud providers, using the same program basically that you used locally to set them up and provision them. So with as few differences as possible, it should be possible to spin up a virtual machine and install whatever you need to have installed on that, and then just with basically a command line parameter say that do the same thing on this cloud provider instead. So that's the first theme, how to get to explore different options for doing that. Second theme, big data analytics, is where we will be looking into a big data problem, trying to solve the problem locally first, exploring different solutions for how to work with a big data problem, whatever challenges we may encounter there, and eventually come to a point where we have a solution that might work if only we had enough system resources, and that's where we connect it to with cloud computing, because the last bit is to explore how much system resources do you actually need, and try out different ways of deploying this big data analytics solution that you've developed on a cloud. Alongside with this, basically, you can do the big data and cloud business case, where this one is less hands-on. The first two are very much hands-on. It's a lot of programming involved, and Bash script programming and Java programming in particular. The business case theme is more about writing and thinking. It's about reading the course books, reading research articles, and thinking about that, and then reflecting upon when is big data and when is cloud computing the best option.
There's a bunch of assignments.
Sorry. Hello.
Yes, please. Yep.
Hi, Venkatesh here. Sorry to interrupt. Do we need to write coding as well?
There will be coding involved, yes. For the cloud provisioning and deployment, it's mostly we use Vagrant, which is an environment, or whatever you would like to call it, where you set up your virtual machines and install whatever you need to install on them. This Vagrant is configured using Ruby script, so it's a small amount of programming there, but with the focus of getting a machine up and running. We then move on to use different deployment tools such as Puppet, which is, well, it's more declarative than it's programming, but there's still a lot of a bit of coding involved. For the big data analytics, yes, there will be Java programming involved.
Okay. Yeah.
We give you a lot of the code already, but you'll need to read that code and understand it, and then modify it according to some goals that we set up according to the way, or along the way.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
The cloud business case, though, is it's basically set up as a couple of quizzes with questions, and you write answers to each question, and that's basically the extent of that theme. So there's no coding involved in that one. We have divided the themes into a couple of assignments. Or basically there's one big assignment, you can say, that we split up into small submissions so that you work a bit and then you submit something as a checkpoint, and then you go on and work a bit further, and then you submit the next checkpoint, and so on. Just so that we can keep track of how far you've gotten, where you're stuck, or if you're stuck, and then we can give you more guided feedback when you need it. So rather than having one big bang submission in the end, we have smaller submissions along the way. You do this individually. We won't stop you from collaborating. We encourage you to collaborate with each other. But for the sake of practicalities, we say that it's individual work. But if you want to collaborate, then please feel free to do so. Emmanuel, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
So first I was thinking, looking into the questions in regards of the cloud business case. Usually there is some, I guess you have some expectations on how much text you would like to read, or how little text you would like to read. Are there any guidelines?
I've been thinking of putting up guidelines about it, but I've decided to leave that. So if you start submitting something, and I think that, well, this is not sufficient, then we enter a dialogue. I think that's much more productive than me saying that, well, it should be at least half a page or whatever, because a half page full of nothing or just fill up the space doesn't really contribute anything. So it's much more important that you start writing something and submit that, and then we can discuss what is missing, what I think you should look further into, which is for all the assignments, really. Thank you for bringing that up. I see this as a dialogue, and I think I have a slide on that. I'll take that one now. This course runs for the entire semester. We end formally sometime in early January. During this time, do the assignments at your own pace in the order you feel like. We don't dictate a particular order. There's a particular order which is easy for you to cope with, and that makes subsequent assignments easier to do. But if you want to focus on one theme ahead of another because you think that's more important to you, then feel free to do so. And during this time, during this semester, submit things. We have a discussion about things. We have a dialogue, and once we're both satisfied, then I'll
allocate a mark on it. And I think the grades on the assignments are just pass and fail. So it's really it's up to us together to decide when you pass. So it's a discussion, ongoing discussion throughout the entire semester. That's the way I want it. Which means, of course, that I can't really say that it must be at least this many pages. It's sort of up to your ambition level as well.
Yeah.
Any further questions there?
For me?
Yes.
I was also thinking about, do you expect referencing to whatever you write in all the questions, or is that more free thinking and how you reason about things?
It's mostly about reasoning, but if you do have references, then include them.
Yeah.
And if I think that there is something that should be more referenced, again, then I'll say so.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
So these are the official guidelines that we give on the course. Of course, if you have other reasons to say that, well, it's now way past January, and but I just have this one submission left, can I do it? And of course, it's a dialogue between us and you then as well to see how we can fit this, because of course we don't want to just stop the course because the time is out. We are fully aware that you are adult human beings with jobs and families and all sorts of things around that will interfere with the course, so that it's not as easy to focus on the course as you hope probably when you start the course now. So keep the dialogue open, talk about what challenges you have, and then we'll accommodate our requirements and our schedule around what fits for you. That goes for the assignments as well. We provide instructions for one technology stack. It's Vagrant and it's Puppet and it's VirtualBox, for example, and it's Hadoop for the MapReduce things. If you have reasons, for example, your company is using Microsoft Azure or whatever, so if you have reasons to explore another technology stack, then say so. And I won't stop you from doing it in another stack, but I might not be able to help you with as much in depth as I would be able to do in the stack that we suggest. So, or for that matter, if you find that one of the assignments is if you can tweak the assignment and thereby making it immediately useful for your company, then do so. Tell me, talk to me about it, and we'll see what we can do so that you can find as much use as possible of what you do in the course as possible. Right, layout, and this would be a good idea, a good point to switch over to Canvas. You've already, some of you at least, have already acquainted yourself with the course homepage on Canvas. So Canvas is the place where all course information is added. If there are, whichever course you take at BTH is going to be here. You find information about lectures, assignments, further readings, and so on. That's the same. That's true for this course as well. So this is going to be your go-to page for the course. Plenty of information here on the first page. A few things might be important to point out. We will be available on Zoom every Tuesday afternoon. So there's a link there to the Zoom meeting room. It's the same as we're using now. If you want to have meetings at another time, send us an email and we'll book something. There's a chat room on Gitter. If you have quick questions if you're working on things and you have a quick question, if I am working, I am online in that chat room. A lot of the course is offered through the discussion board. And you should really be seeing all this down here because that's the some of the posts that are left over from last year. But if you go into the discussions page, you will see that there's a bunch of, or a couple of discussions already. And if you have things that you want to share or ask questions about, then post a discussion about it, and we can all join in and participate in that discussion. So the course, or the themes, if you scroll down a bit, the 3 themes are split up into a bunch of different modules. So each of these is a small module, and I can go into modules here. This looks slightly different for you as students. I have a few more tools in order to add stuff and publish and stuff and so on, but essentially it's the same structure. So if you go into a module, you'll find that there's a couple of pages there to read. Some of them will have a few pages with information and a few tasks to do. And then maybe a quiz where you fill in when you answer a few checkpoint questions. And that's the structure of this of each module, that you have things to read and things to do, and a few questions to answer. And that's how you work through the course. Each module is roughly 10-15 hours of work, perhaps. And the modules are, so a couple of modules together is the extent of one particular theme. I'm not sure if that made sense. Going back here. So you have a theme and you have a couple of modules, and for each of them you read stuff and you do stuff and you answer a few questions and then you move on. As I said, the order in which you take the themes is very much up to you. If you want to take them, this is the recommended order, that you do provisioning and deployment first and you do the analytics afterwards. The business case assignment you can do more or less at any time because they're not building on each other as much. So I would suggest that you even do that in parallel if you have the time for it. The reason why these two are slightly more connected, the provisioning and deployment and the big data analytics assignment or theme, is because you will eventually be needing to set up your deployment environment in the big data analytics assignment and setting up Hadoop and so on. So if you've done the provisioning and deployment first, it's a bit easier for you. But again, if you want to do it in a different order, then I won't stop you from doing that. Right, that more or less covers this. And as I said, we don't have any deadlines during the course. Submit whenever you're ready. Plan your own time. It does help, I've found, that if you set up a time plan for yourself now, plan whatever you have already that you're aware of already. If there are deadlines at work, for example, and you know that you're going to need to do a bit of crunching to meet those deadlines, then plan for that already now. If you are going away on a holiday trip with your family or whatever, then plan for that already now. Make sure that you plan for not working with the course during the Christmas holidays. Some people tend to, or a lot of previous students have thought that, well, I'm a bit behind, but I'll catch up during the Christmas holidays. It doesn't work like that. During Christmas, you're supposed to be with your family, and most of those people realize that come January, they haven't had a chance to focus on the course. So allocate time for actually being free during Christmas. Try to set aside a few hours, between 4 and 10 hours every week, where you can work on the course focused. Talk to your employer. Maybe they're willing to give you some time so that you can work during office hours on the course as well. If they see that you taking this course is beneficial for them as well, they might sponsor you with time for that. And we don't need to see your time plan for the autumn, but I found that it helps that you have something that you puts a bit of pressure on yourself. Otherwise, it's easy that this course is the last thing you'll get to. It's always going to be on the back burner. You're never going to get around to it. So by having a plan, you create basically a guilty conscience for yourself. Right, interaction. Email, of course. Use the discussion forum on Canvas. You can also send messages via Canvas, which will turn up as emails anyway, but you can, if you want to use Canvas for sending those messages, then feel free to do so. We have the weekly meetings on Zoom. Those weekly meetings, by the way, there's no lecturing prepared for them. It's questions and answers. If you have questions, then we can answer them. If you have, and sometimes we might go off on a tangent and give sort of an impromptu lecture, but there's nothing, no lecturing prepared for that. So it's more impromptu based on needs that you have. Daytime, I am available on Gitter on that chat. So if you have questions, if you're working during daytime and you have questions, send them off there. I'll reply as soon as I see them. And that's basically it about the structure of the course and so on. Your next step is going to go to the Start Here module on Canvas and start reading that. Read through the learning material, see what you can make sense, if it makes sense already now. Get an overview of how we think the course should work. If you have questions, then ask them. There's a bunch of tasks listed under the things to do module, or the Start Here module. There are a few things under the things to do section there that you should be doing. One of them is to post an introduction of yourself in the discussion forum. This is something that I urge you to do as soon as possible. We use this as the 3-week roll call. We are required by the Swedish government to have some sort of checkup early in the course to see who that have signed up to the course are actually active in the course, who have the intention of actually taking the course. That's the since we get paid by the government for the number of students that are actually taking a course, they want to have an as accurate measure as possible, not just how many signed up, but how many actually intend to take the course. And that's what we get paid for. So the 3-week roll call, the post this introduction of yourself on the discussion board, please do that as soon as possible. If you don't do that, we will after 3-4 weeks, we will go through the list of participants and deregister anyone who hasn't posted something there for statistic reasons, because that's how we get paid. So once you've gone through the things to do in the Start Here module, you basically select one of the themes and start working on the modules in there. So any questions so far about the contents of the course or the layout of the course?
I could see a few of the modules have been disabled right now, like provisioning and deployment, getting started with virtualization. When are they supposed to enable?
They should be enabled already. Hang on, let me switch over and see. It could be that they are requiring that you have done things before. So if you see here that there are prerequisites that you have to have done the things that are listed in the prerequisites before they are available to you. For the provisioning theme and those modules, it's not that much that you need to have done the Start Here module, and you need to have done the learning of provisioning and deployment. Basically read through these things, and especially this one, you need to view that one. For the big data analytics assignment, it's more that you have to both do what's listed in one module and submit the quiz in the end, and we have to mark that quiz before the next part of that theme is open for you, because they build upon each other, and we give you more or less for the next step, we give you the answer to the previous one so that you can continue building. So therefore you have to have done or attempted by yourself to do what is required before you get to the next step. But they should be opened up once you do the start here, and then the provisioning deployment learning module, you should be able to get access to the rest.
Okay, thank you.
I can say also about the, let's go to this one. Provisioning and deployment module or theme. In the beginning, these the assignments are relatively easy. It's about, well, installing VirtualBox and installing Vagrant and setting up one machine using the defaults and starting that up and trying out that everything works. Over time, we are removing more and more of, if you will, the scaffolding around you, so that you have to read more in the official documentation, especially when it comes to Puppet, which comes into the provisioning part. We get you started, and then we point you towards the official documentation, which is, it's an open source project, and that means that documentation is almost as a given not the most user-friendly to read. But understanding those kind of documentations and understanding these, how to do provisioning with the help of these open source documentations is part of the course, because even if you're not going to use Puppet in the future, you might be using SaltStack or Ansible or whatever. The documentation is about on the same level. So figuring out how to search through this documentation and extract what is needed in order to get a particular task done is part of working with cloud provisioning and deployment today, sadly. So we start out easy, giving you a lot of the answers, and then more and more we require you to figure out the answers on your own. We're of course always there to help you if you get stuck, but the idea is to get you to fly solo. Right. So we've got a few minutes if you want to discuss a bit. What experience do you have already in terms of big data? What are your examples? What do you think makes big data big? Is it just the volume, or is it something else? And how do you deal with these things today? And what is your dream scenario? How would you like to deal with it? So I open up the floor to all of you to share your war stories, if you please.
I think I got very interested in this concept when I watched The Great Hack, the Netflix documentary, about how user data, etc., can be manipulated. Not that I'm aiming to manipulate any kind of data, but just how important it is and how what implications it has, and maybe the security aspect of it, how to kind of safeguard it from being misused. Otherwise, I have no experience whatsoever, I think. Sadly, not yet. And I think it's big in, of course, in bite size, but also in kind of usability terms and what you can achieve with it. I think for me that's the significance of big, apart from, of course, the byte size of it.
Right.
Okay, for me, big data is like everything from social media, like Twitter. You can analyze a lot of text there, but also like when it comes to images and like real-time data, maybe from industries.
And what's interesting there with the Twitter example is that the big data comes in when you deal with all of the users at once. The data from one particular user on Twitter might not be big data, but when you try to put it together in order to distribute to all the followers and in order to do proper analysis, that's when you run into many of the big data problems, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I haven't worked practically with big data yet, but I would like to, and I would like to introduce a use case in my company. My company is using big data in different teams, but I haven't had a chance to work with it yet. But I've seen my friends when I was in different organizations working with big data, and they used to like pull data from different social networking sites, and they used to run predictive analysis on that and predict something depending upon different user behaviors, how they are posting on on the social network, what they're liking, what they're not liking. So I have seen that happening. I haven't indulged myself in those activities, and I have been always fascinated with that fact. So that is our enroll in this course, so that learn something about big data and then try to apply it in my organization or in my future projects, which I have in mind since I have my own company.
And I'm sure if you think about it that all of you have used services that would define themselves as being big data. Everything from, as Twitter was mentioned, some of you might have used Shazam to identify songs and music and so on, or other services like that. You use Spotify, a few of you, I guess. Email, Gmail, if you use that, then that's big data. And Canvas, I guess, is they would call themselves big data as well, because it's not just one university that uses it. It's, I think, all of the universities in Sweden at least, and a couple of others. So using services that define themselves as big data, you all have experience in that if you think about it. These days, every time you go to the doctor, they will use big data in order to help diagnose you. They've always done that. They diagnose with statistics first, and then with medical procedure second. So then, if we look at the second question, what makes the big data big? We've talked about the volume, that it's a lot of data. Now, the volume can be seen in two ways. It's either that you have each item is really big, for example, an image might be really big, or a video, for example, that you need to analyze, or that you have many small nuggets of information, each being, well, let's say 280 characters. Do we have other ideas or other examples of what makes the big data big? So one of the things that's usually introduced there is the diversity of the information. That so, for example, a Twitter post, if you're going to analyze that, or something else from a social media site, you don't know in which order the information is posted there. You know that it might be a natural language thing, and somewhere in there might be information that you're looking for, but you don't know the exact form it takes. It's not like a number in a spreadsheet that you've pre-formatted and predefined that this number should be in this range and it should have this precision and so on. Here it's more that it's a free flow of information, and somewhere in there might be information, and the next time someone posts something, it might be the same type of information but in a different format. So dealing with these different formats, dealing with these different ways of expressing the same thing, that's another thing which makes big data big. That we can't just apply one single way of analyzing or extracting that data. We need to have multiple approaches for getting that data. So that's another thing that makes big data big. And then the connections. Again, Twitter is a good example, because you need to spread what one person posts, you need to spread to all the followers, and you have different ways of doing that. So you have a network of information. It's not just standalone nuggets of information, it's connected. And there you have a very well-defined format of how things should be connected, with mentions and with followers and so on, and hashtags and so on. But sometimes you don't have that. Sometimes that's part of the extraction process, is to create the network. Again, that's another way of defining what makes big data big. It's that it's connected. And when you analyze things, you need to be aware of these connections. And then when it comes to the analysis, what may make big data big is the fact that it's big enough for you. Even if it's simple, it might be big enough for you that you can't do the analysis by loading everything into memory, one computer's memory, and then analyze it in one go. You might have to devise strategies for splitting it up, distributing the work, because you can't do it in one go. So the way the data is shaped guides how we can set up an analysis of it, and that analysis might make it too big for one computer, and that would be one definition of saying this is big data because we can't analyze it in the most obvious approach. We need to rethink the problem. And that's part of the big data analytics assignment in this course, is that to look at a relatively straightforward thing with we're looking at code clones. So if you have your source code repository and you want to avoid repeating yourself in this source code repository, so how many times have you been copy-pasting code in some format or other in this code repository? And we'll be starting with the most obvious naive approach of looking at this, just basically taking one piece of code and then comparing it with everything else, and then you realize that you run out of memory really quickly there, and time. So how can we rethink the problem, redefine the problem such that we can actually have a chance of doing this analysis? If not at real time, then at least within a reasonable amount of time, and within reasonable amounts of memory. This code clone example, I mentioned Shazam, that's actually very similar in nature, that type of problem. And looking for genetic markers for the different diseases, for example, is another example of a very similar type of problem. So we use code clones because this is a software engineering course, and we think that you might have use for that type of analysis, but it's actually representative of a much bigger class of problems. Okay. is there anything else anyone of you would like to share when it comes to big data or cloud computing for that matter? I realize I don't have a slide on cloud computing like this, but if there's anything you'd like to share about hopes and aspirations of the course. Otherwise, I will stop the recording.